Good morning, everyone. Hope you all are having a great week. I would say this has been, a good week for the industry as we step in the right direction. But how much should we buy into this? We've seen the announcements over the last 2 weeks. Well, this podcast here today is about diving in a little bit deeper to see what we can expect next. So with our guests, we have Safira Galoof, the United States Cannabis Roundtable, coming on in just a minute with regards to the Prepare Act, along with the state's 2.0 Act that was filed last week, what we should anticipate next pertaining to that, and really the momentum that's going on in Washington, what she's seeing and hearing. And then further to that, based on Terry Cole's announcement this week from a legality standpoint, we'll bring in Shane Pennington to really understand the rescheduling process and what we should anticipate next. That's a great show coming up. So glad you're here. Let's welcome in AV here on a Friday morning. Good to see you.
How's it going?
Good. Sporting the Sunburn Cannabis t-shirt.
Yep. Got to support the locals.
Got to support the locals. And what a dispensary he has. I know it's been probably, a month since we were there, but
yeah,
such a cool place that he's got there in Fort Lauderdale, right?
Yeah, they're great locations. He luckily inherited MedMen, or not inherited, but acquired MedMen.
Yeah.
Which are great sited locations. And then they did a number on their retail locations internally with aesthetics and design. So it's a nice asset to acquire.
Good blend. Mark Landers, good to see you. You're up in Scotland today. Good to see you, my friend. Lots going on. I know we're going to get into probably a little bit more deeper discussion with Michael Bronstein. We're going to try to reach out to Brady and get him on Monday to talk about obviously the latest news out of your state, Florida, and the hemp side of things. And everything's going to remain status quo, which is not the news that we wanted. But we'll get their take on that on Monday. But for now, we want to obviously explain and talk a lot about some of the news that's gone on last week, this week, a lot of moving parts in Washington. So first up, as we said off the top, both the Prepare Act and the state's 2.0 Act, which was filed by Dave Joyce last week, along with other members from Congress, to really understand what kind of political impact they'll have. Let's welcome in Safira Galoof back to the podcast. Good to see you and good morning. How are things?
Good morning. It's great to be here, and thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, well, I always appreciate it, and no better person to have when it comes to reform than the people on the front line in Washington. So are you in Washington right now? Where are you?
Well, actually, today I am in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, of all places.
OKC. What are you doing in OKC?
Well, I don't know if you know this, but I hail from Oklahoma. I'm visiting my folks this weekend, and I actually went to law school here. So I just came home for a quick 3-day. You got to take care of the folks.
Nice. I don't know if you've seen that show, Tulsa King, with Sylvester Stallone, but there's some cannabis ties with the indigenous people in that. And I'm just like, wow.
Absolutely. It is. It is. Paul Demko from Politico did some really deep dive on reporting about cannabis in Oklahoma, and it is a sight to see. It is the true wild cannabis West, for sure.
Why? Really? How so? If you don't mind me asking.
Well, I mean, when the program came online, I teased to say, you know how you can get a cannabis license in Oklahoma, and then I'd say you drive up across the Texas border. It was that easy. And at one point, it was like one license to every 300 Oklahomans, and they had more Oklahomans in their cannabis and in their medical card program than actually California. Like, it has been an absolute. It came on with an explosion. And then over the years, they have really rolled back and tightened up how to have licensing, but there's just cannabis everywhere.
And our good friend Shane Pennington, who's going to be coming on, we actually were speaking before we went live here today, said there's an angle with Merrick Garland that has some ties going back to the 90s. But you want to share what he had to say pertaining to that?
Yes, I'm going to be aging myself a bit, guys. So I started law school in 1993.
93?
Yep, 93. So during my my constitutional law class, that is when the Oklahoma City bombing happened. So I remember very, very clearly. I was in the middle of class, and it was all downtown. And we were talking about just being in Oklahoma City during that time. And Shane, who, of course, in addition to being a brilliant legal practitioner, is also a legal historian, and said, do you know who the prosecutor was? And he reminded us that it was the famous Merrick Garland. So I thought that was interesting connectivity.
Small world. Don't you love the storylines within the storylines, right? It's amazing how the path we are today, you got to understand where you are today and where you came from. But that's not fascinating. But
it means you always have to behave yourself, Shad.
Yeah, exactly right. Is that possible in the cannabis industry? I don't know if it is.
I'm working on it.
Look, last week, Congressman Dave Joyce, along with other members of Congress, they filed the More Enhanced States Act, which is now the state's 2.0 Act, along with the Prepare Act. And I know we were talking about this yesterday, that we really want to dive into the Prepare Act, what exactly it's actually going to do, and how should we interpret this based on the timing, the intent, and how it relates to, I guess, preparing Congress for a national cannabis regulatory model. So with that, it is preparing. So what are some of the requirements and steps that we should be paying attention to pertaining to this bill that's been filed?
So let's first of all make sure that all of our listeners know what the States Act and the Prepare Act does in terms of what its contents are. So the States Act, which was originally filed by Senator Cory Gardner, and it was a piece of legislation that Mr. Gardner and Elizabeth Warren drafted that really allows states to set their own cannabis policies. We're very happy about this because this is consistent with what President Trump's position is and his approach that he laid out during the campaign trail. You know, every state has a unique program and it's not a one size fits all. So it really, this piece of legislation puts states at the forefront of cannabis policy. Yeah. It also is a piece of legislation that makes it very easy for conservative politicians to, you know, whose priorities are states' rights approach to get behind. It does, we'll say, deschedule cannabis. I always say it's like as a very scalpel approach to legalization, because essentially it deschedules cannabis in states where cannabis has a state regime, but only to the extent that that state defines a policy. So in Oklahoma, for example, medical cannabis would be descheduled, but adult use would not. But in California, all cannabis would be descheduled.
Did you
want
to?
How does the Evidence-Based Drug Policy Act play into this? Because that was filed by Representative Titus as well as Ilhan Omar, and that seems like it also makes a lot of common sense in terms of the current scheduling.
And that actually is a bit of a completely different. I do want to talk about the evidence-based. Can we put just a pin in that for a minute? Because I want to talk about the Prepare Act, which is really the compendium. I'm not trying to avoid your question for sure, but I definitely want folks to know that the kind of the bill that goes with the Prepare Act, the States Act, is the Prepare Act. And this is the second time that piece of legislation has been introduced. So the Prepare Act is really a piece of legislation that the Joyce office introduced. It's really brilliant because one of the things that all lawmakers on Capitol Hill, when you're working with lawmakers, are aware of is that we really don't know how the federal government is going to interface with these state policies. And so what David Joyce did was he specifically said, let's prepare for cannabis legalization. And by directing federal agencies to ask federal agencies, how do you see your role when states come online? Basically, when the federal government legalizes, how do you see your role? And so it really designates federal agencies to do research and get back to Congress on what they think their role is. And so it is exactly what it says. It's to get the federal government organized through federal agencies to basically prepare to legalize. And it's also, I'll say, the politics of this are very interesting, gentlemen, because, you know, a lot of times we out here in the hinterlands, we don't really understand the way Congress works. But the truth is, David Joyce knows what he's talking about. For us to be able to do anything as it relates to cannabis reform, we are going to 100% get more Republicans involved. And one of the things we know as we're putting legislation forward is that you need bills that bring people from the sidelines, or in this case, from the stands to the sidelines to the bench and on the field. And because the Prepare Act doesn't do anything to legalize cannabis, it just says there needs to be additional action. It is a way for Republican members who know that action needs to be taken, enter Senator Tillis during the latest hearing, and it gives them a piece of legislation to join on to that doesn't do anything about legalization, but is very pragmatic. So it makes a lot of sense that would be introduced with the States Act.
Incremental steps, right? And that's always kind of been the, I guess, common sense approach, but it hasn't been the approach historically, right?
Well, we really have seen, depending on who's in charge, full descheduling bills that we, of course, know were introduced by Senator Schumer with the CAOA and Mr. Nadler who is chairman of Judiciary, called the MORE Act. Those are full descheduling bills. Those are everyone gets everything or no one gets anything bills. And I'm not putting judgment on that, but that's just the way they operate. And we have known for a long time, those who kind of live and work in Washington on these bills, that because you're going to need 60 votes in the Senate, you don't even have 60 Democrats who support full descheduling. So unless you do something that is going to garner enough support and enough votes, it really is more of a messaging bill. And it is not, it's aspirational. I don't first get a full descheduling, but we are in a moment where sequencing is important. And the sequencing we are in now is getting more Republicans on the field to work with us and be our champions. We know that messenger matters. We know having the right people fight for our reform is important. And this state's reform compendium is the best way to do it.
Does someone like Senator Tillis change the political calculus to a certain extent, to where him coming and saying that we need to be changing these cannabis laws, especially aligning federal with state, get more Republicans into the conversation in terms of sequencing?
I will tell you, I was beyond thrilled to hear his remarks. I've known that behind, we'll call it like conversations in conversations in the hallways of Congress or over dinner parties, he has really acknowledged the need for us to remove this conflict between federal and state law. And we know he's a states' rights approach. But there is a difference, as we all know, in having a conversation with a member of Congress in a private. And the dicta, which is what we kind of refer to in the law as something that doesn't necessarily mean sponsoring a bill right now, but he let his position be known. He liked states' rights. He likes the states' rights approach, and he thinks there needs to be a fix to a very big problem. And having somebody like Senator Tillis say that is really, really important for momentum.
Last time we spoke to you, I think it's probably been 2 months. Can you talk and share with us like what you're seeing, hearing? Like, there's a lot of people out there that are following this space and want to understand what kind of momentum is building, I guess, in Washington right now. But when you see what Anthony said with Senator Tillis and other people basically looking at this differently, are you starting to see that based on more and more conversations that you're having on how people are viewing this?
You know, I want to always be known for being as precise as possible with what's going on in Washington. I still think the reform movement is at the mercy of broader political dynamics in Congress. The good news is that we have a president who, during the campaign, his campaign very much articulated a support for states' rights approach. And he has been a promises made, promises kept president. And so I think having the signal from the commander in chief is going to help Republican members of Congress feel more comfortable to be more public about reform. I even with all stars lining up, we still have to be able to navigate through Congress and the politics. And this means we've got to be able to ride on bigger legislative vehicles, meaning we're not going to be standalone bills. It also means that we have to continue to educate. We have to be speaking with one voice. And we have to make sure that we're not giving members of Congress desperate messages. So I am optimistic, but I'm also very realistic. And realism means that we have to be able to navigate through bigger politics within Washington policy progress.
Yeah.
Do you think that rescheduling, if it is to happen first, reduces the friction within that political calculus? Because dropping from an S1 to an S3, you're not sitting there with the likes of fentanyl and other narcotics. So from a political standpoint, these representatives can actually start to get a little bit of cover as they're not talking about a Schedule I substance
Anthony,
or even endorsing
question.
A bill. Yeah.
That is such a good question. I'm so glad you asked. We absolutely think moving to a Schedule III will help momentum in Congress. And let me give you a specific example. So when we're working with people on the Safe Banking Act, for example, the Safe Banking Act creates a safe harbor for federally regulated financial institutions to serve the cannabis industry. It creates a statutory safe harbor for them. Some of the offices with whom we have spoken over the years believe that this should actually happen. They absolutely think that state legal businesses, because as a reminder, businesses, corporations are creatures of state law. They're not, you don't create a corporation with federal law, you create it under state law. So a state created business should have access to the same financial institutions. But for some of these lawmakers, because cannabis is still a Schedule I drug and therefore considered illegal, it is really hard for them to get their head around giving them access to the business services that other legal businesses. And I will say, Chairman Scott's bill, the bill that addresses debanking, he does have a reference to legal businesses there. So if we move to Schedule 3, we automatically count as a legal business. And so having us move into Schedule 3, I think would give us a lot of momentum. It would also give us momentum in the states. And we know, if anybody who's been in this industry, as long as the three of us have, we know that the momentum from the states is absolutely the recipe towards federal reform. It's taken longer than we want, and we are very frustrated. All of us are, not some of us, all of us. But this is a bottom-up approach. This is a grassroots, grass tops from the state up approach, and that's how we get to victory.
Yeah. Well, you talked about momentum, and when you look at the state's 2.0 Act, you just mentioned Dave Joyce, Congressman Dave Joyce, knows what he's doing. And what I liked when he filed this, it looks like it's in line with what the administration wants, which is like something that we need to pay attention to. So how much momentum do you feel on how this was filed and presented, knowing it is in line with the administration? I think people want to understand what kind of momentum potentially could have, because it did look like a common sense approach, which something we really haven't seen in quite some time pertaining to the industry, was how some of the stuff is worded, because it's incremental steps.
So I want to make sure folks know the history. This piece of legislation that David Joyce has adopted, or he basically took the lead from Gardner, we've seen this bill introduced for years in multiple Congresses. So it is not that it hasn't seen the light of day before. It just keeps getting introduced so that folks have developed familiarity. We get new lawmakers to be able to support it. So the momentum is really going to come from a committee chairman who agrees to have a hearing on a piece of legislation. So we're going to have this is going to have to go through the Judiciary Committee and the House and the Senate. We'll likely have to have a markup, and then we will likely have to have another legislative vehicle. When people hear me speak, I explain, if you've taken an Amtrak train, one train doesn't leave the station, multiple cars leave the station. And so like other pieces of legislation, like the Safe Banking Act, we're going to have to ride with a larger vehicle. Having a President Trump support a States Act bill, plus a vehicle leaving the station, plus getting momentum in committees, that's the kind of momentum we see. But I want to caution people, and people reach out to me all the time. I saw this bill introduced. What's the likelihood it's going to pass? And this is my feedback. When we get legalization at the federal level, I believe it will be via the States Act, but there are still a lot of stops along the way for this bill to garner the additional support that it needs, and to be able to have the traction that's going to be required to push it towards bill passage. And that is not going to be overnight.
You had just mentioned that it would potentially have to go through a hearing in Judiciary. Isn't Chuck Grassley the chairman of the Judiciary?
Yes, and I want to be careful not to get too much in the weeds now for this. So we have so I've been working on cannabis policy since November 7th, 2017. And when people say, what is the biggest problem in Congress? I say we usually have an issue where the chairman of the committees of jurisdiction, by the way, both on the D side and on the R side, many times we don't have those types of champions in those positions.
Correct.
And that makes a difference.
Mm-hmm.
So it is unlikely that a piece of cannabis legislation, I'll say it's highly unlikely, will become law without going through a hearing. And you're absolutely right. That is an obstacle, but it is not an obstacle that may, depending on who the bill sponsor is and depending on what happens, these things can be overcome, but folks need to understand the process to understand the prospects.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so managing expectations. A lot of people were very hopeful, optimistic, and feeling good, especially after Terry Cole announced this week that once he is actually confirmed as the head of the DEA, that one of his first priorities is going to be looking at marijuana rescheduling, which definitely was music to a lot of people's ears that want to see progress. We want to obviously manage expectations, but at the same time, too, I'm just seeing some of the comments here, and people are like, "Oh, this is going to take more time," but all in all, these are positive steps in the right direction, right?
Yeah. We were very encouraged by nominee Terry Cole's acknowledgement that cannabis rescheduling is something that the Trump administration will look at. And I think it was a clear signal that President Trump continues to be open to practical reforms that resonate with a broad swath of the American public.
Yeah, I hear you.
And we at the United States Cannabis Roundtable, we look forward to continue engaging with the Trump administration on common sense cannabis reform that reflects both public sentiment and responsible governance.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, listen, I know you're busy in Oklahoma City, but I don't know too many people there. But for the nice, kind people of Oklahoma City, tell them that we say hi. And listen, always appreciate just a quick update. And, I think the most important takeaway we have to take from here is that we are heading in the right direction, but at the same time, too, managing expectations. I know people want this to happen overnight like they always do, but all in all, tell them the last time the head of the DEA actually said one of my first priorities is going to be reviewing marijuana rescheduling in any previous administration. It's never happened before. So that's a good measuring stick as to where we are today versus, say, 4 years ago. But it's all in all a good step in the right direction is how I view it.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and I look forward to speaking to you all again soon.
All right. Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate your time. Well said, right? And we want to have these people on. But like I said off the top, we want to manage expectations on what these headlines are and really what's next and what we're looking as far as timeline. But, it's good to hear that and take it as you wish and digest it as you wish. But well said, right?
I mean, there's no other way to take it. You're talking about passing laws that relates to a Schedule I narcotic right now. These timelines are going to be long. Yep. There's going to be roadblocks, and there's going to be political posturing and processes and procedures that need to be followed. This isn't like introduce a bill and, hey, we're going to go vote on it. It's expectations are important here. And while the conversation is having a groundswell right now, and there's a lot of positive data points out there, this isn't happening tomorrow.
Yeah, I agree.
Regardless.
Yep. 2028 might be our year, says Raging Gun. And I don't know if you saw.
We got the midterms coming up in 2026, and I do think that the Republicans are going to need to have some issues that are going to need to make people forget on what's going on right now. Cannabis could be one of them. Not saying it is, but it could be.
2028, I think it was 2029. You see the news this week, the Cannabis, they actually made a press release that they received the receipt of their senior secured notes. It's now indeed pushed out to 2029. So, you're going to want to see stories like that and press releases like that towards a lot of companies as they try to push their debt out. But job well done on by them. We actually reached out to their team yesterday. They're going to be coming on later this month. I know earnings are coming up the next week or two, but we're going to aim to have Jesse and David back on the live stream. It's been a few months, but a lot of change since we've last had them on. So I know a few of you have reached out with some questions, but they have a lot of stuff that they want to get us up to speed with. But more importantly, that's the state that we're in right now.
Yeah, I think you're going to see a lot more of that.
Yeah, you will.
I've been buying Ascend recently.
Yep.
Because they have their maturities stretched out until 2029. These financiers and these funds, they don't want these businesses. Granted, it's going to come with certain dilution. There'll be certain covenants and there'll be certain warrants that are awarded.
So they want this to work.
That'll do the shareholder pool. But none of these financiers want these businesses. They don't want the keys.
So they don't want the business or the keys. The way you should interpret that is they want this to work for them and do whatever they possibly can, right?
Yeah, they want to keep clipping their coupons. They're going to get more equity. I mean, as they keep elongating these timelines. But I mean, these companies aren't going to falter, but you need to know what you're owning and you need to know what the leverage and the cap structure on whatever these businesses looks like, because some are going to get more diluted than others, Air being one of them. Yeah. That's going to probably succumb to heavy dilution as it relates to their common stock.
Yes. Well, let's that wraps up segment number one. Now time for segment number two. It's bringing in attorney Shane Pennington, who arguably is our most popular guest here on Trade to Black. Let's welcome him in. See there? There he is.
He's
coming up
there.
There he is. I was told not to make him laugh or smile. Broke two ribs. Did I hear? You were telling me last week. How are we doing? Are we feeling better?
Yeah, the pharmaceutical drugs work wonders for certain things. So yeah, I'm doing well now.
Well, good to see you're doing well. Lots to talk about, including obviously Terry Cole. We're still waiting to see if he will indeed be confirmed as the head of the DEA. And he said, obviously, in the announcement earlier this week that once confirmed, one of his first priorities in the job will be reviewing marijuana rescheduling, which was great to hear, to say the least. So what do you make of that? Is that, I guess, how much weight should we put into that? And, again, I'll say I think it was a good thing because we've never heard something like that before. But how did you interpret it?
I think it's a really good thing. The reason being that, I've been on a couple times, I don't guess very recently, but as this is all unfolded, and I've said consistently that, look, once the administration turns their attention to this, it can be done very quickly, right? And if that's their will and they want to do it, it will get done. And I stand by that. And the thing that has changed is they have turned their attention to it, because there's no way that the nominee went in front of Congress and, said that and didn't mean it and didn't know that that should be one of his priorities. Now, he, of course, was careful not to say, how exactly he was, intending to act, but that's normal, par for the course. It'd be very strange for him to do otherwise under the circumstances. And the fact of the matter is, if what he said is true, he's the boss at DEA. And it is pretty easy for them to wrap this up one way or the other. They have lots of options, but I take it as a very good thing that we're going to get movement. Something's going to happen. We're going to move forward. And one way or the other, any movement at this point, I think all roads do lead to Rome. Some are more circuitous than others. Some will take longer, more steps than others, but there's just no way around it at this point, on the record and just the science that's out there, that I think that once we move, we'll be moving in a positive direction.
In terms of moving, what is that first logical step once he's reviewed the rescheduling process and what's going on? Is it filing a response to the interlocutory appeal, scrapping the ALJ altogether, or is that where he needs to kind of start to triage first as far as this process goes?
So because he's the DEA administrator, he's the head of the agency, once he's confirmed, he has what's called discretion. So he can do, he has a lot of options, it's up to him whether, he could just go forward with the ALJ hearing by setting a briefing schedule, and we could go forward with that. He could also decide, this interlocutory appeal, I don't think it's necessary. I don't think this hearing is necessary because in hindsight, the Biden administration's DEA obviously granted it for reasons other than a transparent process designed to get to the bottom of the science and facts as best they could. And so there's no need to continue down that already compromised path when the record is so clear. So we could just cancel the ALJ hearing and go straight to a final rule. He could do that. And there are many other ways that he could proceed. And so because, when you're the boss, you hold all the cards, you get to decide how much to bet, when to fold, when to hold, all that.
I think the most compelling part moving forward is the fact that no more ideology. This is going to be based on data and actually science. And I think that's what we've been saying from day one, because that's the most compelling part when trying to make a case for rescheduling. So he made a point saying he wants to look at the science before making any decisions from a regulatory law standpoint. He also wants to form, I guess, this group that he was discussing about looking into this further. So do we have any idea, how does that all work? Who's involved? We don't know yet. But when it comes to creating this group and what they'll be looking at, what are we looking as far as a timeline? Any idea?
So I have no idea. The group that they were talking about forming, as I understood it, they were talking about getting a group that wasn't just DEA and wasn't just, agency officials. And so I don't know how, that would be up to whoever's going to be in charge of that, how that's formed and how long they take. Usually things like this tend to take a while, which is not something that I would want, because we've already had the review that the statute calls for, and it's the most fulsome review the DEA has ever done in its history. And it's for a substance that they already know more about than any other substance in the known universe. So how much more do we need to dance on the head of a pin here? It's not like there's a, surprise cannabis. Oh, what's that? This isn't something that we got from outer space. This is something that everyone is very familiar with. So he also said that he thought that it's been stalled for too long, that the delay, has to come to an end. And so unless there's some, and I'm not saying what he knows or what people are looking for exactly, I don't know. But as from where I'm sitting, I don't know what more they're wanting to dig into there. but hopefully it would be something rifle shot or clear, and they could get the answers that they're looking for as quickly as possible.
In terms of him looking at the science, obviously that's an ambiguous statement. He can look at it in a negative light. He can look at it in a positive light. How important is the OLC memo here that basically rubber stamped the process that was used in the HHS report if he decided to, let's say, take the other side of the coin?
So extremely important. So there are two things that are very, very important. We're in a process where there's an HHS recommendation that draws conclusions that the statute calls on HHS to draw. Those conclusions are binding on DEA up to the point where they grant or issue the notice of proposed rulemaking. Now, of course, in this case, they didn't issue the notice of proposed rulemaking, but we'll put that aside for now because there's a new boss in town. The point is that even after that, throughout the process, those findings, the medical and scientific findings and conclusions of HHS get strong deference. So in other words, if DEA wants to disagree, they have to have some really good reason that they have to explain, which will then get a lot of scrutiny in court if they were to reverse one of those. So that's the first thing that's sitting there like a gorilla on top of this thing, right? Just pounded bananas, just Schedule 3 bananas all day going to that gorilla's mouth. And then you have OLC, which is unusual and extremely important because OLC authoritatively resolved the key legal questions and objections that the Biden administration's DEA raised having to do with treaties, the role of HHS, and the currently accepted medical use standard. That stuff is done. DEA can't overrule that. The only way that changes, there are, I guess, I can't off the top of my head get the number, but I know what they are. First, if OLC were to revisit it, they could change their positions. And of course, we have, I assume, some new folks at OLC. I don't know that for sure, but I assume we have some new folks at OLC. That's one. Two, the Attorney General can overrule OLC. So that's another way that it could change. Three, the President can overrule OLC. And four, Congress could overrule OLC. And I guess a court could too. I mean, that's not going to happen. It's not going to get litigated before this gets concluded for a number of reasons. But those are the ways that it can change. Short of any of that, no one in the executive branch, other than the President, the Attorney General, can overrule a binding OLC opinion. That's what we have here. And unlike the HHS recommendations, which themselves I described as a gorilla, the OLC opinion is an elephant, right? It is bigger and badder, and it's sitting there. Nobody can touch that. And and to understand how those two things work together, think of it this way: HHS is like the science and medicine expert, so their findings on the science and the nerdy stuff bind. OLC is the boss of the law and how it's to be interpreted and applied to those factual data points. And so OLC has dictated sort of the bowling alley lanes, right? And HHS has said, put the ball on a certain trajectory. And the only way for it to get off of that trajectory is for some, legitimate force to move it at this point. I hope that makes sense.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
That's what I was hoping. That's what I was hoping you were going to say in response to that question.
Well, I was going to ask, where does Pam Bondi, I guess, factor in all this? And is she someone to lobby in this issue? But I think you pretty much clarified where she sits on a lot of this stuff right now. But all in all, I say this is a good thing. And I know there's a few people here saying that Ann Milgram said the same thing, that she would look into it. But why does this feel differently this time? Or is that wishful thinking?
Well, it's different this time because we have an HHS recommendation, an OLC opinion. We've gone through this hearing and uncovered all sorts of stuff about Ann Milgram's DEA and the DEA under Ann Milgram's watch. And that is in a record that's in this rulemaking. In other words, there's a historical event that happened that she oversaw. She said those things to Congress, right?
Yeah.
And then we got to see what she did from there. And that stuff doesn't look good from the standpoint of what her DEA was doing. And so, what we have now is the new DEA administrator coming in under a new administration. And this stuff has been reported on. It's public. It's not like this is a secret.
Yeah.
And so, as I've said before, and as everyone understands, it's about what the science is clear. You know what I mean? The science is, the science, you can always debate it, right? But there is enough science for the leading scientific organization in the world to have concluded thoroughly, after a thorough review, that this is how it ought to be, right? And then we've already kind of gotten a preview of what the other side was going to put on at the hearing, and there wasn't any kind of nuclear bomb, oh my gosh, all this stuff we had somehow overlooked for decades. No, it is what we thought. And so, the issue is, are we going to have an administration that has the will to get this done, and are we going to have a fair and transparent process? If you have those two things, there's no way that this gets sidetracked at this point.
Yeah. Well, I asked the question because when people bring up this question, I want them to clearly understand what the difference is between now with this administration versus what in place before. And jury's still out, but we see some promising steps in the right direction. That's all you can ask for at this time. But timeline wise, I don't like to ask those questions, but yes, people want to know, but we don't know the answers to that. But all in all, I think it's been a good week for the industry, and let's see where we go from here. But have you run into and spoke to Michael DiGiulio, any of the people over at Village Farms, based on the feedback from this week at all?
I mean, I'm in contact with Village Farms, all the time, and I've had conversations with, when this all happened, my phone was blowing up. So I've talked with a lot of people, and candidly, everybody's asking me what my reaction is, which you just got. So I haven't heard anything in addition to that. I listened attentively to what Safira said, and everyone should. She's really, really great, and knows what she's talking about.
Yeah.
That's that. You guys know what I know.
Yeah, I hear you. Listen, get healthy and don't crack any more ribs, but I appreciate the update and really giving us an understanding of where we are and what we should anticipate next. But let's keep in touch. Okay, Shane?
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
All right.
Thanks, man.
Okay, bye.
And Educational Friday continues. And, again, well said. I like what he's basically outlined as to where the president, the attorney general, where they all stand in a lot of this stuff when it comes to the OLC memo, as you indicated. But yeah, it's a good thing. But at the same time, too, we need to understand the process of it all, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's looking pretty black and white.
Yeah.
Unless we got something out of left field and someone's been lying the entire time.
The Cole memo writes, Shad AV, do we have any concerns about Terry Cole's post in 2024 on social media where he says, quote, everybody knows my stance on marijuana. Just say no. I think it's a clear indication that why would he say what he said this week when one of his first priorities is about the rescheduling of marijuana?
I mean, I haven't seen that post, so I don't even know if it's real, to be completely honest. And at the same time, what DEA head or what figure in the public is going to sit there and publicly endorse marijuana use? I think when it's coming from someone like that, a lot of it is focused on adolescent use. A lot of it is focused on illicit use. And I'm going to go by what he said in that hearing, and I'm going to go by what he's going to do moving forward. We'll see.
Common sense question is how's this?
I mean, not legal for distribution. That's a true statement.
Right.
It's not federally legal.
Right.
So it is what it is.
How has the history of this country viewed cannabis? So name me the head of a DEA that's actually endorsed or actually talked positively about cannabis in the past. It hasn't, but this is the time that we're in. And again, I'll continue to repeat myself. It's law and order with this Trump administration. And as we've always said, everyone needs to be in line with his vision. And he's a common sense approach type person. So there's reasons why that Terry Cole is mentioning during his announcements in his press conference. One of the first few things that he's saying is the rescheduling of cannabis will be one of his first priorities, which is, you got to look at that as a win, but at the same time too, it's not going to happen overnight. But again, what we said previous to that is look at stocks that are basically pushing their debt out a couple of years. This is not going to happen in the next 2-3 months. Like, be patient, but we're heading in the right direction. Hope that makes sense. Anything else you want to add?
I'm good.
All right. Saying that, I know we had some price action off of that announcement. I'm going to put you into the back scenes, and then I'm going to bring in Arns. Let's bring him on up. Dan from the chart guys. Let's go. right. Happy Friday. Good to see you, sir. How are things?
Things are good. Glad to be back.
Yes. Well, we had an interesting announcement midweek this week, as we've been saying throughout this live stream, with Terry Cole announcing that, yes, indeed, marijuana rescheduling is something that he's going to look at once he's in the job. With that, we saw some stocks move. I haven't gotten a chance to see what they're doing here today, but let's have a look at some of the charts and see what we have heading into the end of the week, and more importantly, what we can anticipate going into next week. So, well, I think we should start with some of the big MSOs. Let's start with, let's go TC, and actually, let's go MSOS if you want. TrueLeaf, doesn't really matter.
Let's start MSOS. So I've traded MSOS more this past week than I have in at least 7+ months, just because, again, the volatility, the volume has returned. Yeah. We got a couple days where it was the highest volume of 2025. Those have both happened in the last 6 trading days or something like that. So that's definitely notable. Again, as you keep talking about the timeline, from a bear thesis, time is the bear's best friend, where, you get the spike on a headline and you get a quick rush for shorts to cover and, some longs to jump in. And then you see a lack of sustained rush. It's like a one-day thing, and then things cool off a little bit. And, this is a perfect example. The volume that we saw on that headline Wednesday, 40 million shares traded. I was astounded at how low it was the next day. I expected it to be lower.
That surprised you? I thought this would run a couple of days, but yeah, it was just like, it was almost even done by later that afternoon.
Yeah. I mean, we had 15% of the volume the next day. And today we haven't even hit 1 million, and we hit 40 million 2 days ago. So it just shows to me a fervor of activity, a lot of it algo related, right? I mean, there are algos and automated trading systems that are programmed to instantly act on headlines. And that's why when you get a headline like we got on Tuesday that was, bill introduced to allow the drug czar to say something. Yeah. If you put in the headline, bill marijuana legalization, you will get automated trading that reacts to that. And the people that put out these headlines know that. And so just be aware of that as well. But it's a short fervor of activity that then significantly slows down. And then again, a bear looks at that and says, okay, I'm aware of what the incoming head of the DEA said, and I don't have to worry about anything for months. So I'm going to try and grab a short off that resistance. So it continues to be a battle. We got a daily uptrend as far as key resistance. I always look back at where there was a lot of price action on the way down. Yeah. And we just had so many holds of support, and then it was resistance, the 320s to the 330s. So that helped find a short-term target of resistance. I don't often short this sector. It's usually just day trades, but because I had a long swing right on the headline, I did short it in the 330s, covered it later that day, but essentially just defining the support and resistance levels. And again, the big one for me, I'll always keep talking about the weekly. Can we confirm a weekly uptrend once we top out? Don't have to worry about that now. We're still watching the daily trend.
Yeah, of course.
Anything above 261 is a daily high or low. If we break 296, we pull back. We look for another daily high or low. But again, it's just a drip of headlines that get that algo response push up. And ideally, we keep getting that headline drip because it's clearly that without the headlines, there's still not that much interest.
Well, that was going to be my question, is as volume starts to dry up a couple days afterwards and heading into next week, and let's say there's no announcements, is this the new bottom? Are we seeing a resistance level where we're structuring things to be a little bit higher, or are we in a situation where, stay tuned as to how things could actually unfold in the next week or two, and we could basically retract to where we were before this announcement?
I mean, we can definitely retract to where we were before this announcement, in the sense that weekly consolidation can get us there. A lot of this move is a shift in the broader market mindset of, okay, big wave of fear subsides a bit, and risk on is back on a little bit. And, we had that being the backdrop for the start of this bounce. Then the headline gets that spike up and keeps it going. It helps with that momentum. But we can definitely, just the consolidation from yesterday, we gave back. If you look at, where we were pre-headline into how much we gave back yesterday, we gave back 65% more. We gave back most of the headline reaction.
I'm not going to lie. I was surprised because, when this announcement was made midday Wednesday, it was like over by the end of the day. First thing Thursday for sure. I thought it would basically be sticking around. There would be a little bit of interest within the industry for a couple of days, but that wasn't the case. But I'm assuming we're going to see a similar trend with other MSOs outside of MSOS. But let's look at Trulieve now, TCNNF.
Yeah, it's a little bit less clear just because of the lack of liquidity, but I'm looking at the most important level for me is 406. We have a double top 425. And again, the people who say you can't do technical analysis on this illiquid sector, I understand why you say that, but I mean, you just look back at in January, we topped out at 520, 524, 521. It's not a coincidence that we top out at 525 and then 525. So it is useful to mark. It was clearly support after the election announcement when we had the collapse. It's clearly been resistant since then. So that's the most important. These two levels, if we break that support, the weekly consolidation is underway. But for now, we are still holding momentum on the daily uptrend.
Okay, let's move down to GTI.
Looks a lot like MSOS, just trading sideways the last couple of days. If we break 625, we'll say daily consolidation is clearly underway. Again, the lower wick from the other day is not near where we currently are trading, 521. That's the most important level. This is the kind of chart where if I didn't love the cannabis sector, I pull up this chart and say, I don't love the clarity here. I'm not trading this name.
Yeah, good point.
MSOS is, it gives me enough clarity. But again, the OTC aspect of these things, I mean, the range of this one daily candle on Green Thumb that day is a 38% range. And again, it's just a lack of liquidity in both directions. You get this huge wick down at 8% to start the day, and then the headline comes out and you shoot up 24%. It's definitely very difficult to trade these OTC names, which is why I don't do it.
Well, good point by Mitch. The ETF MSOS just sold GTI 2 times this week. That was interesting. Good point, Mitch. What can we look at besides this? Oh yeah, Tilray. I forgot to bring that up last week from some of our viewers, so I'll bring that up right now.
I mean, it's as bearish as you can get. I have not had anything remotely bullish to say about this name for years. I understand, the bag holders holding out hope, but this is the lesson giver. This is where you learn, okay, I made giant mistakes. I need to change how I approach markets to never make those mistakes again. Because again, the amount of times I've seen a stock do this, I can name 100. In this sector, I can name dozens over the last 14 years.
Yeah.
It rarely happens from such a large market cap, but the destruction of shareholder value, I mean, this goes in the history books in terms of astounding. So, can it bounce 50% really easily at some point? Yeah, because of how smashed it is, because of how many bears are on it. But again, every time frame you just zoom out, we're just looking for another lower high. You can bounce 100% and still form a weak monthly lower high on this downtrend. So, I've been warning about
here we are with comments. Tilray's gonna boom, baby. That's the following, man. I'm like, what do you say with your workshops when investors come and are so fixated on a stock? How do you try to remove the emotion away with the attachment of a stock?
It only comes through pain. I mean, it's the kind of thing where I give, my number one thing with trading is you have to have a stop loss in every trade. And I'll look someone in the eye and I will tell them that, and they still won't do it. And so I have to accept, okay, this is a lesson that has to be learned with personal pain. You've got to feel sick to your stomach. And, again, this stock will bounce, just like the penny stocks that I was trading in 2010 to 2014 in this sector. They would drop 90%, and then they would rally 300%, and then they would drop 85%. And it's just those dilution cycles that lead to that kind of price action. Headline, dilution for a year, headline. And so this is the same thing. Yes, if you can get the timing right, it is going to bounce 100% off the lows. But it's the 99.9% drawdown the rest of the time. And it's just a trade, right? Is this company ever going to survive and do anything worthwhile on the long-term trend here? I mean, you're talking needing a 5,000% move to even get back to, levels that we were at a few years ago.
Yeah, no
and
kidding.
So again, I can just show you all these penny stocks, MJNA. like this is where I got my chops in trading. And look at, what it does. It goes up hundreds of percent. It gives it all back over a year. It does it again on a headline. It gives it all back. It's just a grind to zero. And I made a dilution video on YouTube years ago.
Zero. Well said.
I call it a death dilution spiral, where I used ACB in the example of the video that I made years ago, talking about trying to teach people about dilution and convertible debt. And Tilray and CGC are doing the same thing in terms of their price action, their dilution, their reverse splits. It's just a recipe. It's penny stock 101, where these CEOs will jump on something. They know they're never going to be profitable. They'll get paid their salary by diluting shares. They'll run it into the ground, and then they go to the next one. And again, there's just nothing on the Tilray chart that shows me that it's anything different than what I've seen in the penny stock world for a decade plus.
Well explained. Safe Harbor Financial. Do you know their ticker symbol? It was way up. Was that earlier this week? Yeah, it was earlier this week. It was up.
I don't know their ticker.
Let me look real quick. Is anybody leave in the comment section below? I'm just bringing it up real quick. Safe Harbor. I think it's SF. Safe Harbor Financial stock is SHFS.
SHFS.
SHFS. Yep.
So again, another one where I just zoom out and remind myself, okay, we are in free fall. All right, let's zoom in, see where we stand. Okay, weekly bounce is underway. I would call anything under 668 a weekly lower high. Again, the volume here is atrocious. I mean, we're talking, well, actually, no, I take that back. What's going on here? Okay, we had one day. That's throwing me off. We had one day with huge volume. I assume news. You go from $100 million that day, and today we have $10,000 traded. I've never seen that kind of discrepancy. That's insane.
Is that insane?
That makes no sense to me. That generally, it's like MSOS. You get the huge volume spike. It can dwindle, but it still is it's not a complete drop off to zero. That's insane. The next day so you go from $100 million plus, and the next day you get 2 million.
Yeah,
that's wild. So
something's up there.
Key levels, 303 is an important support. If you break that, we're just heading back down to the gap fill. There's 223 is where that would fill. We've got a couple of resistance levels, 415, 433. Again, knowing nothing about this company, that volume spike into a drop off raises red flags, where if I'm interested in this company, I got to do a lot of digging and figure out what's going on there, because that is very unusual.
So that's 100 million. How many days ago? And now we're down to 10,000 in a matter of what? 5 days?
21st, 2 weeks ago. Yeah. 43 million.
Not even 2 weeks ago.
Average, we'll call the average price traded maybe $3.80 times 43, $120 million plus dollars. That's insane.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? I think there was one more. Let's try Canopy CGC.
So again, at least there's a bounce underway. I mean, and again, percentage wise, right? Someone will look at this and say, we just bounced 114%. Yes. If you can nail the timing, it's worthwhile. Just know that as a professional trader that's been doing this in this sector for 14 years, who loves oversold bounces, that's my edge. That's where I've made the most amount of my money. When you're in a all-time low, slow bleed, I don't have confidence in my abilities to nail the bottom like that. So just know that it's extremely difficult to do so. That said, the key short-term support is 125. We got resistance at 151. If we break that support, weekly consolidation will be underway. And then we'll look, can the bulls form a weekly higher low compared to the all-time low of 77 cents? And again, CGC, TLRY, ACB, say whatever you want about the different fundamentals. Their charts are all doing the same thing. Yeah. Insane destruction of shareholder value.
Yeah. All right. It's the takeaway. But more importantly, it's just when you look at somebody or an trader that's fixated on a stock and you try to explain as much as possible and they still are committed to that stock, you realize just let them run. They're going to have to learn this themselves the hard way.
I did it. Yeah, I did it. I held some cannabis penny stocks to zero when there was a 2014 boom. And, I 10x'd my net worth from 10,000 to 100,000, big level up at that age. And I thought, okay, I'm going to grab a couple of these lotto plays and see if, they can become something. And they just went to zero. And, you go through it, you give it all back, you lose all your money on the individual name. And then the key is that you learn the lesson, because if you don't, you will never make it in this game. It'll eat you alive.
Well said. As usual, at the Chart Guys. And if they want to sign up for any workshops, where do they go?
We actually got a free trial running. So just go to our website, chartguys.com. I'll talk about it in a video I'm going to put out tomorrow. But yeah, 2-week free trial. Check out our chat room community, our live streams and all that.
This is awesome. Probably the best show yet we've done, but I appreciate the feedback, Dan. As usual, enjoy the rest of your day and weekend. We'll see you back here next Friday, okay?
All right, have a good one.
All right, thanks, Dan. Bring Anthony back up. And I think that was great. That was a great one.
It was informative.
Like when he said, look, don't do this, and if they still want to go ahead with it, go ahead. Do what you got to do.
That's what you have to do. I mean, people that like Tilray love Tilray. It's a cult stock.
Yeah.
They're ignoring fundamentals. They're ignoring some of the management's behavior. They're ignoring the dilution that goes on every quarter. So I think it's a free double diamond. It is what it is.
Yeah.
If you truly believe in it and you're willing to lose money in it, go for it.
Go for it. William, we did bring up ACB, Aurora. I think CGC is different because of CUSA, but they need to stop the dilution, which I get. Got some great feedback, actually, at their first interview with Luke. I thought that went well. And all in all, this has been a really informative podcast here today. I was going to ask Guap. Guap, I know you're making comments, but if you want to come on for mic drop, just like segueing out of the show with that kind of music. And just bring the music up regardless, Garns. How's that sound? All right. You coming on? Back. But a good week all in all. Like I said, Monday we'll have Brady Cobb hopefully on. If not, Michael Bronstein is going to be coming on for our weekly Insider's Edge. We'll talk about the latest news in Florida regarding hemp. And next week is earnings week, and a lot of it, as we're going to have Michael DeJulio from Village Farms on next Wednesday. Still trying to lock down Boris on a day and time, but we are in talks with them. And the next Friday, Charlie Bachtel from Cresco Labs, followed by Jason Wild and Ziad from Terracin, who have not been on in a while. They're going to be on in a week from now. So lots going on next week. What are you looking for next week come earnings time?
Any sort of growth.
You think you'll get it?
I'm not sure. Probably not.
We keep saying that, but there's a few players widening the gap that continue to grow. So we'll look for that trend next week. But all in all, be a busy week.
I would. On a serious note, I care more about steady margins. And not seeing margin erosion within the numbers versus growth. Top line will probably be stagnant. It'll be flat to negative to a small degree. But being able to maintain those margins is going to be key.
Will be big. Don't crack the foundation. Keep it steady. And these are some of the reports that we're going to see as to, I think Florida, as we said a couple weeks ago, it was supposed to go live, this month? If it did pass Amendment 3?
Yeah, it would have been going live in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Need more markets to go online for growth. But all in all, it's been a really good week, and we can see a sign of things to come on the brighter side if we do get moving on the reform side. But it's nice to talk about some things, and especially things in the right direction. But in the meantime, everybody, enjoy the rest of your day. Make sure to scan that QR code if you want to get all the latest information and what we're going to be looking for heading into earnings season. So if you haven't done so already, make sure to scan that QR code and become a daily baked-in newsletter subscriber delivered to your inbox weekdays, Monday through Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern time. Anthony, enjoy the rest of your day. Hope your baby's all right. Hope you're getting some rest. And we'll see all of you back here Monday at 4 o'clock. Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Now, that was a good one. What'd you guys all think? Did you like what we had to say here today? Do you agree, disagree with what we're saying? Love to get your feedback. As usual, leave comments below. Trade to Black is growing, and we wouldn't have done it without you. So if you haven't done so, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also check us out on Apple and Spotify for the audio version. And as usual, leave lots of comments. We, as I said, love to hear back from you. Thanks again, everybody, for watching.